Thank you, Heather and Ron, for having me. And thank you, Peter and Charlie, for reading with me. This has been such a treat. Back when I was at Iowa, I wrote a lot of really long short stories that were like 50 pages. And I had a heck of a time finding a good home for them. And I was so thrilled when I finally found a good home for one of them with Alaska Quarterly Review. And that's always been a very meaningful publication for me, that story in particular. But I'm not going to read that story today. I'm going to read from my new novel, Defenestrate, which is 1 month old today. Today's its 1 month birthday of being in the world. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning so I don't have to do too much setting up. But I do want to note for listeners that the novel is written in short titled sections. And I'll be reading 4 of those sections. So I'll just read the title and then the vignette that follows. Golden years. When I picture the city now, I see it from overhead, bird's eye. A long, lonely aerial view looking down onto orange clay roof tiles, curved like the shells of snails. The city shrinks, small enough to be covered with a palm, my twin brother's. We both seem to remember those years from above, as if we were often sailing out over the streets that opened up into squares, the ice skating rink dusted blue, that high clock tower with its windows sealed shut, the bridge a long spine of black bone straining across the bread-colored water. And I guess it's true that the city rises, tiered, made up of slopes and heights, spires and hilltops and towers, all these high places you could climb to get a better view of things. And I guess it's also true that I was always climbing them. I remember once wandering home drunk and coming upon a bit of scaffolding along the back wall of a church and starting to climb it without even blinking. My brother was there too, but he didn't follow. He stood with his hands shoved into his coat pockets, whistling golden years and rocking forward and back on the balls of his feet. Always so careful, my brother. It's strange that eventually he was the one to fall. I stood up there with the frost in the air hitting me just right so that the skin on my face came awake for a moment. And then my cheeks went all sleepy and numb, and there was a faintly greenish mist coming up off the snow that sat in gutters, tram lights glancing upward. Nick waited down below until finally he called up, "Hey sis, you get your kicks yet?" And I guess I had. I don't know what it was I hoped to see from up there. The street getting smaller as though I was looking at it through the wrong end of a telescope, the spires at the base of the hill poking holes in the tame rounded skyline. I was always daring just a little too much in those days, putting space between myself and the ground, myself and safety, myself and my cautious, slope-shouldered brother who was singing under his breath, "Don't let me hear you say life's taking you nowhere, angel. Come get up, my baby." The whole time I was climbing dizzily back down to him. The curse. There's a superstition in our family about falling, a kind of tight-lipped joke that's no longer a joke because it's happened too often over the years. Cousins leaning against railings that wouldn't hold their weight, uncles losing their footing while cleaning leaf debris from slimy gutters, ants toppling from ladders, their spines folding up on themselves like coat hangers. Something in our bodies wants to fall, blood magnetized to pavement, iron and concrete greeting each other across a stretch of air, the downward plunge and crack, like a pink Easter egg dropped from a window. We splinter that easily. We can trace it back a century or so, the story of our great-great-grandfather Jerzy in Prague, who was said to give a gentle push to the back of a Roma stonemason where he stood placing chunks of limestone, smooth and flush, to form the bottom sill of a paneless window in a high church steeple. It was 1895, and there was a resurgence of new architecture, renovation, the city preening and polishing itself like a vast peacock with slate and granite and sandstone feathers. Jiří oversaw many of these building projects, gained a reputation for precision and efficiency. The stonemason, it was said, had seduced Jiří's youngest daughter, but who knew anymore if this was true? What was certain was that the stonemason landed below on rain-slick cobblestones, and his body bent into a hook, curving strangely like a treble clef. And according to legend, witnesses afterward reported that the body didn't bleed. No, they said, not even a trickle. I couldn't tell you what Jiří felt looking down at the question mark the stonemason's bloodless body made against the wet cobbles, the slice of October light that fell across him like a sash, whether our ancestor felt triumph or shame or a rage that still itched in his palms after the suddenness of the shove. But I can tell you that it was the end for him of his hard-won reputation, the end of a long and respectable career, and he fled with his wife and children to the American Midwest, where he found work as a mule driver in a coal mine. It was there the family stayed, and there my brother and I grew up. The belief is that the stonemason's fall has somehow been handed down through the years, that for generations our family has held on to this death and never been forgiven. You could call it a curse, but that's a word we never seemed to use. It's only a story our mother always told my brother and me, but I remember some nights her superstition would get the better of her, and she'd line the floor around our beds with pillows, tucking the blankets so tight around our little bodies that we struggled and thrashed after she switched off the lights, straining against our cocoons like Houdini escaping from a straitjacket. Someone, some relative perhaps, had given our mother a coffee mug that showed a simple cartoon illustration of a man and woman perched on the edge of a deep swimming pool, peering into it. The pool had been drained of all but a foot of water, and standing in the shallow water down below, the pool's high walls looming around him, was a little boy with a tiny rubber inner tube around his middle. The image's caption read, "Better safe than sorry, son." It was this mug that often rested on the squat nightstand between our twin beds while our mother kissed our foreheads, made the blankets tight around us. A smell came up from the mug like leaves going soft at the bottom of a well, mint, citrus, chamomile, as deep and unfathomable as the earth's molten center. And I remember turning my head on the pillow to stare at the mug, the two parents side by side, their legs dangling into the emptiness of the drained pool, and I remember hating them a little for their stifling caution. I think a part of me always longed for the fall. I know it's morbid, but I remember growing up with a kind of envy for that sweet, endless plummet, how your body can be given a measure of grace as it greets the air, feels its own heft and buoyancy. Some members of the family are so superstitious they will not go higher than the second floors of buildings, will keep far back from balcony railings or the sharp, sudden edges of hiking trails. But I've always dared more than the others, climbing up onto steeply pitched roofs, looking out at towering views with an arm slung loosely around a chimney, skirting close to ledges, daring my own weight to pull me down, daring a phantom push from behind, and feeling the height lift through me, all the way from feet to forehead. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a trapeze artist, a stunt pilot, a high dive champion, a female Evel Knievel. Your mother will not go for it, not a chance, my father said when I showed him a flyer for a circus camp when I was 8. Glossy pictures of arched bodies poised on high platforms, lifting their arms above their heads as if straining to get even higher before rising into the air like gaudy smoke, ruby sequins dusting the air with light. It's safe, I protested, showing him pictures of padded mats on the internet, showing him harnesses and cables. A year or so later, I showed my mother an article in National Geographic about cave divers. Now, don't you go getting any ideas, she said, shaking her head a little wildly, her earrings tinkling like tiny bells. She held me and I squirmed in her lap. She sniffed at my hair, and I imagined that it smelled like the high branches of elm trees, like sap and sunlight and too much air. We all make our way through a world of so much danger. I could never believe that our fear should be any greater than anyone else's. I didn't want to believe that my body would be asked to pay any consequence for the actions of a relation I'd never met, of whom not even a single photograph exists. Not that I couldn't imagine him. I felt at times that I knew his face, craggy and sunken-eyed, heavily shadowed from the sight of the stonemason stumbling forward into all that air, swallowing gusts of it on the way down. And on the pavement below, his chest swollen with that huge final breath. Defenestrate. One thing the city of Prague is famous for, throwing men out of windows. The word for this is defenestration. Tourists can climb the narrow stairs to the room where Catholic noblemen were defenestrated because of a religious dispute in 1618. You can look down from the window to see exactly the length of their fall. Catholics say these men were saved by angels, cradled in the arms of the Virgin herself, lowered gently to earth. Protestants say the men survived because they landed in a dung heap piled below the window. Looking down from that window, it is easy to imagine an angel in the expanse between sill and cobblestones. Easier still to imagine a pile of shit, and easiest of all to conclude the city holds both of these in the loose clasp of its hand. Specificity. I remember reading a poem about a philosopher getting thrown out a window and thinking on his way to the ground about why the word for what was happening to him, the word defenestration, even existed. There's no special word, he muses, for being bludgeoned by a golf club, for being tossed off a bridge, for getting run over by a train. So why should this act have been given such a specific name? In the end of the poem, he lands, he survives. He concludes that defenestration is not, in fact, limited to people being flung through windows. Its definition is not as narrow as its original inventors first intended. According to the philosopher, the word speaks, rather, to the specificity of all human experience, of each act being private and particular to the individual experiencing it. His own particular experience being, specifically, that he was hurled through an upstairs window and fell and survived. Thank you.